Today's video is looking at demographic transition. This is a really important model in human geography, otherwise known as the DTM. Demographic transition model is going to help us understand the population structure and as it changes depending on where you are in the world. So major terms and concepts for this video simply is the demographic transition, in other words, that process of change, and two, the 4 stages of the demographic transition. Now there's a 5th step, or stage, that's been debated by some. We're not going to cover it in this video, but we will discuss it in class at some point. Looking at the demographic transition in the stage and the definition of, it's again a process of change in of society's population. And so when we look at the stages as a total, the sum total, what we see is we chart out 3 different really key pieces of information, and there's sometimes a 4th. But on here you see the crude birth rates, the crude death rates, and the natural increase rate over time. In other words, how fast, the percentage at which the population is increasing over time depending on the stage. Sometimes you'll see total population also charted on the DTM, but this is what we're looking at. And so if you can see that on the y-axis, on the left, you've got the crude birth and death rates, and then on the right, the second y-axis, you have the natural increase rate, and underneath you actually have the sum total of what's happening to the population overall. So in terms of our population pyramids, you can see the reflection of that population change there. So the 4 stages, taking a look at for stage 1. First of all, this is categorized by a really high crude birth rate and a very high crude death rate. In other words, this is the pre-civilized or settled societies in the world, that human societies were basically bumbling along, surviving, living just as the other animals, and at the whims of the droughts, the catastrophes, the disease, the lack of food, drought, things that would create very rapid changes in any given population. And so it was very difficult for population to grow. And if you really look at it in the timeline of human history, this is the way humans for most of history lived. Today, there's no society that lives at a stage 1 level. And so if you look at stage 1, you can see the birth and death rates are fluctuate wildly, and so that would also cause the increased rate of the population too as well. However, as we move into stage 2, where the whole world is, as a starting point is today, we still have a high crude birth rates, but we start to see a rapid change in the death rates. Now this is going to create a very high natural increase rate. With high birth rates, low death rates, you're going to see a rate of increase that's going to be pretty drastic. This is where you see countries over 2%, especially as we look at continental Africa as an example. Many countries in Africa have that natural increase rate of over 2%. But the change that triggered this in the world into stage 2 actually happened about 200 years ago. And this is a point of emphasis. The Industrial Revolution, which was an economic change, actually it was economic, social, political, and in terms of social structure, population structure, it was huge. It created technology and wealth in the world that had never been seen before. It allowed for a stable food supply. It allowed for more leisure. It increased wealth dramatically. There was a lot of medical advancements that happened during this period. But it happened about 200 years ago in Western Europe. Started in England. In fact, if you watch the 2012 opening ceremonies, you saw this process happening in the opening ceremonies. There was a second trigger of stage 2 in lesser developed countries through the world about 50 years ago, and it's actually called the medical revolution. Again, another point of emphasis. And this is where we started to see the introduction of the worldwide use of vaccinations and medicines that helped cure other previously lethal ailments. So again, in more developed countries in Western Europe and starting in London, the Industrial Revolution triggered this stage 2 about 200 years ago in the late 1700s, and then also starting in the mid 1700s into the late 1700s. And then about 50 years ago, you started to see the medical revolution. So if you look at stage 2, you can see this pattern emerging, where birth rates stay high, mostly because families, that was the tradition, the culture, the norms that people had expected. Women were generally at home, and you still had this this way of life in which death rates are now rapidly declining, causing this increase in natural population. That brings us to stage 3, and where we start to actually see a declining birth rate. So with a continually declining death rate, but not as rapid as it was before. Because now people are living longer, you're going to see, people are going to die from different factors or different ailments. This is going to slow the increase rate, and this is really marked about 100 years ago, where you started to see smaller family sizes. Women start to work outside the home. There's more education. There's the introduction of birth control in society. There's several factors that contributed to this, but really, for much of the world, stage 3 wasn't really something that was possible until about 100 years ago. And what you're seeing now is, in stage 3, is this rapid decline in the natural increase rate that coincides with the drop in birth rates. And so you see the gap between the birth and death rates in stage 3 narrowing, which is causing population to grow at a much slower pace. Now, if we were to chart population, total population, it's still increasing, just not as fast. So that brings us to stage 4. This is where we're going to find an established low birth rate, a crude birth rate, a very low crude death rate, but now as we have an older population, we're going to start to see more deaths just inherently by age and of ailment. And then we're going to see a growth rate that is either going to be close to 0 or perhaps even negative. And this is, again, where we get into that point, the stage 5 debate we won't quite address right now. If we look at countries that are in stage 4, these are going to be the most highly developed countries of the world, or the MDCs. And this is where we see oftentimes wide use of birth control, women that are empowered and educated and also working. As women become more established in the workforce, they've obtained more education, they're more likely to put off having families. In the United States alone, the average age of the first child for women has changed dramatically over the last several decades. But this is also going to affect population as women do become greater participants in the economic aspect of society. And so you see that in stage 4, population increase actually gets to the point where it almost goes to 0, or perhaps is, and birth and death rates almost intersect, creating that lack of the natural increase rate. And so the next step, if we were to look at this in another way to tie it back to what we've studied already, population pyramids, you can visually see what this would look like in a rapid growth population pyramid on the far left. This would reflect a country that would be in stage 2 of the demographic transition. Remember, no country today is in stage 1. So when we look at the major population pyramid types, we look at the rapid growth model, and you can see what population growing rapidly because birth rates are high, death rates are low, and it's going to cause a great great natural increase rate. As we look at stage 2 of the demographic transition, we start to see lowering birth rates along with those lower death rates, and so population is still growing, but you can see, notice on the population in the middle bar, you actually see right here, you actually see the population starting to slope, lessening. And that brings us to our stage 3, or our stage 4 model, where you start to see that narrowing base in the population pyramid. So where we see in stage 4 where natural increase rate is reaching 0 or very close to it, and you see that in the sense that the birth rates have dropped to the point where they're actually near the death rate total, and reflects that negative or slow growth population pyramid that we see on the far right. And again, so if we're just taking a closer look at our population pyramid with the rapid growth, our stable or slow growth, and then our declining or negative growth based on each stage, 2, 3, and 4. So hopefully that helped clarify or introduce the concept of the demographic transition model. You should be familiar with the idea of demographic transition, the change in a population structure over time, and the 4 stages of the demographic transition model. Be sure to bring any questions you have to class, and we'll see you.